The great obsidian chamber of the Ethelgard hegemony did not reflect light. It swallowed it, much like the Empire itself had swallowed 1,000 lesser civilizations over the turning of 10,000 galactic cycles. High Archon Valen stood before the expanse of the viewing wall, his multifaceted eyes narrowing as they processed the stream of data that was, by all accounts, impossible. The air in the chamber was frigid, kept at a temperature conducive to the crystalline physiology of the ruling council. Yet Valen felt a phantom heat rising within his core, a sensation akin to the biological terror he had read about in the archives of lesser species, but had never experienced. Behind him, the semicircular array of the High Council sat in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing against the atmospheric scrubbers. They were the masters of the known spiral, the architects of the Pax Ethelgard, the custodians of the warplanes, and the silencers of dissent. Yet, in this moment, looking at the jagged, chaotic telemetry streaming from the edge of the uncharted sector known only as Sector 88 Zeta, they were reduced to the primitive trembling of prey sensing a predator in the tall grass. The data did not make sense. It defied the established laws of naval warfare, contradicted the logic of energy-to-mass ratios, and violated the fundamental psychological profiles of sapient species. The Krell, a warrior race of immense brutality and endless numbers, a scourge that the hegemony had spent centuries trying to contain through blockade and appeasement, had launched an invasion into that dead sector. They had gone seeking resources, slaves, and a new staging ground to flank the hegemony's borders. They had taken a force so large it darkened the stars of the border systems, a jagged river of durasteel and plasma engines that stretched beyond the range of sensors. And they had vanished. They had not vanished into a black hole or a warp storm. They had not been lost to navigational error. They had entered the gravity well of a yellow dwarf star, a system unremarkable in every stellar catalog, inhabited by a species the hegemony had dismissed as primitive industrialists barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere. The Krell had entered the Sol system with the intent of harvesting it. The telemetry Valen watched now was the fragmented, screaming final transmission of the Krell warlord's flagship, the World Breaker. The footage was grainy, distorted by intense radiation and kinetic impact debris, but the image was clear enough to shatter the calm of the Ethelgard elite. It showed the Krell armada, not in formation, but in ruin. It showed ships of immense tonnage ripped apart not by elegant lance beams or antimatter containment breaches, but by sheer, brute physical trauma. It looked as though a giant, invisible hand had reached out from the void and crushed the Krell ships like dry leaves. And amidst the wreckage, moving with a terrifying, silent coordination, were the ships of the natives. They were ugly things, blocks of heavy metal devoid of the aesthetic grace of galactic standard design, bristling with projectile weapons that the galaxy had abandoned millennia ago. But they moved with a ferocity, a suicidal bravery, and a mathematical precision that terrified the High Archon. The Krell were screaming in the audio feed, their guttural voices pitched in a panic Valen had never heard from the warrior caste. They were screaming about the demons of Sol. They were screaming that the atmosphere itself was fighting them, that the ground troops were unbreakable, that the species known as humans did not understand when they were beaten. Archon, the voice of Counselor Xylith, broke the silence, a sound like grinding glass. The simulation has been run 1,000 times. The result remains the same. The Krell Armada was not merely defeated, it was erased. The survival rate of the invading force is 0. The human casualties were high, catastrophic by our standards, yet their combat efficiency increased as their losses mounted. This defies the morale algorithms. It defies logic. Biological entities flee when faced with 80% casualties. These creatures, they accelerated. Valen turned slowly, his ceremonial robe sweeping across the polished floor. He looked at Xylith, seeing the fracture lines of fear in the counselor's carapace. "They are not logical," Valen said, his voice resonating with a deep, harmonic hum that usually commanded instant obedience but now sounded hollow. "We dismissed them as Grade 2 primitives. We watched their radio broadcasts for cycles, their chaotic internecine wars, their noise, their pollution. We assumed they were a self-correcting problem, a species destined to burn itself out before it achieved faster-than-light travel. We were wrong. The Krell intrusion acted as a catalyst. We did not understand the one trait we filtered out as background noise. The Count. Ill leaned in, their bioluminescence flickering in anticipation. "And what trait is that, Archon?" asked another counselor, a being of fluid and metal. "Spite," Valen whispered, the word tasting alien on his tongue. "And an instinct for territorial defense that transcends survival. They did not fight to live. They fought to ensure the Krell died. It is a distinction we must understand, or we shall be next. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on the third planet of the system. Earth. It looked scarred. The orbital captured images of burning continents, of atmosphere choked with the smoke of orbital bombardment. The Krell had rained fire upon them for weeks before landing. By all rights, the humans should have capitulated within the first planetary rotation. Instead, the data showed that as the cities burned, the planetary defense grid went dark, only to reactivate using primitive, hardened underground redundancies. They lured the Krell into the gravity well. They allowed the enemy to land. This was the part that chilled Valen the most. Standard galactic doctrine stated that one defends the orbit to prevent a landing. Once an enemy lands, the planet is lost, and capitulation follows to save the infrastructure. The humans had done the opposite. They had opened the gates. They invited the Krell down into the mud, into the ruins, into the close-quarters slaughter where superior Krell technology was negated by human ferocity. The reports from the Krell ground teams, transmitted before their biomonitors flatlined, spoke of kinetic weapons that punched through energy shields, of ambushes in radiation zones, of soldiers who continued to fight after sustaining mortal wounds. One transmission, translated from the guttural Krell dialect, simply read, "They are made of soft meat, but they do not break. They utilize their own environment as a weapon. They burn their own fields to deny us food. They collapse their own cities to bury us. They are insane." "The question remains," Xylith interjected, trying to regain the veneer of bureaucratic composure. "What do we do? The Krell are shattered. A power vacuum has been created in the outer rim, but this Sol system, it is now a fortress, and we have detected energy spikes. They are reverse engineering the wreckage. The Krell brought hyperdrives, plasma containment, and shielding technology to their doorstep. We gave the humans the fire, and they have shown us they are willing to burn the galaxy to keep their cave warm. We must sanitize the system. A Nickel-Dyson beam from the Centauri relay. We must burn the infection before it spreads." A murmur of agreement went through the council. It was the logical choice. The Ethelgard hegemony had maintained peace for eons by removing variables that could not be calculated. Humanity was a variable that was purely chaotic. To leave them alone, now armed with Krell tech and tempered by a war of extermination, was to invite disaster. Valen looked back at the screen at the blue marble swirled with the gray ash of war. He saw the flicker of engine signatures. They were testing, trying to leave their gravity well. "No," Valen said, shocking the council. "We will not fire the beam. The Krell attempted to destroy them, and it only made them stronger if we fire and fail. If we miss, or if they have already spread to the asteroid belt and dug in, we will have declared war on a species that treats apocalypse as a tactical inconvenience. We cannot afford to be the second invader. We must take a different path. We must speak to them." The uproar was immediate. Diplomacy with primitives, it was unheard of. The hegemony dictated terms it did not negotiate, but Valen raised a hand and the chamber fell silent again. "Look at the telemetry," he commanded, gesturing to a specific cluster of data points near the human moon. The Krell command ship did not detonate by accident. It was boarded. A small shuttle, barely shielded, rammed the hangar bay. Humans in void suits breached the hull. They fought their way to the bridge and detonated a tactical nuclear device manually. They sacrificed themselves to decapitate the enemy command structure. This is not just savagery. This is devotion. If we can direct that devotion, if we can ally with that capacity for violence, we secure our borders forever, or we destroy ourselves trying to cage them. I will lead the delegation myself." The decision was made, though the fear in the room did not dissipate. It merely shifted form, from the fear of the unknown to the fear of the inevitable confrontation. The Ethelgard fleet, a shimmering armada of white and gold, would not go to Sol to conquer. They would go to knock on the door of the haunted house, hoping the monster inside was willing to talk. The journey to the Sol sector was tense. The hegemony fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of the heliopause, a respectful distance, broadcasting peace codes on all frequencies, including the primitive. Radio bands the humans used. The silence that greeted them was heavier than the void itself. Sensors swept the system. It was a graveyard. The debris field of the Krell armada formed a new ring around the Earth, a glittering band of death. Thousands of shattered hulls drifted in the dark. But amongst the dead, the living moved. Human salvage crews were swarming the wreckage like ants. They were stripping armor, weapons, and engines. The speed of their industry was alarming. As the hegemony flagship, the Light of Reason, drifted closer, a signal finally pierced the static. It was audio-only low fidelity, crackling with background radiation. "Unidentified vessels," A voice spoke, flat, synthesized, and devoid of emotion. You have entered the exclusion zone of the Terran Coalition. You are targeted by 3,000 kinetic mass drivers and 52 appropriated plasma batteries. State your intent or prepare to be fired upon. You have 10 seconds. Valen stood on the bridge of his ship, the translation matrix relaying the words. There was no posturing, no "who are you?" Just a threat and a timer. "This is High Archon Valen of the Ethelgard Hegemony," he replied, his voice projected across the void. "We are not the Krell, we come in peace. We witnessed your defense, we wish to speak." The pause that followed stretched for an eternity. The tactical officers on Valen's bridge reported weapon locks from the planet's surface, from the moon, and from the debris field itself. The humans had turned everything into a gun. Finally, the voice returned. "Hold position, a delegation will approach. Do not scan our vessels, do not raise shields. If you deviate, we fire." It was humiliating for the masters of the galaxy to be ordered about by a species that had barely mastered fusion, but Valen signaled compliance. From the debris field, a ship emerged. It was a Krell destroyer, but it had been butchered, painted in matte black, covered in weld scars and bolted-on armor plates. It looked like a Frankenstein's monster of spaceflight. It docked with the light of reason with a shuddering clang that vibrated through the hull. Valen waited in the grand reception hall, flanked by his honor guard. He expected warriors in blood-soaked armor screaming barbarians. The airlock hissed open. A ramp descended. 3 figures walked down. They wore pressurized suits, not bulky combat armor, but sleek, functional gear in gray and black. They carried no visible heavy weapons, only sidearms strapped to their thighs. They removed their helmets. The leader was a female, her skin pale, her hair cropped short and gray. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes, dark, biological eyes, scanned the room with a terrifying intelligence. She did not look impressed by the crystal spires or the floating lights of the Ethelgard architecture. She looked like an inspector evaluating a structural flaw. "I am Admiral Vance," she said, her voice natural now, raspy from smoke or disuse. "You watched," she stated. It wasn't a question. "We monitored," Valen corrected, stepping forward, towering over her. "We monitored the incursion. We are enemies of the Krell. We did not intervene because we did not think you would survive long enough for our fleets to arrive. That was a miscalculation." Vance looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You watched," she repeated, colder this time. "You sat in the dark and watched them burn our cities, and now that we killed them, you come to talk. Why? Are you afraid we're going to come for you next?" Directness of the question threw Valen off balance. "We are here because you have altered the balance of power," he admitted, deciding that truth was the only currency these creatures might value. "The Krell were a plague. You stopped them. We wish to understand you. We wish to offer assistance, humanitarian aid, technology, admission to the hegemony." Vance laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "Assistance," she mocked. "We have enough Krell tech floating in orbit to jumpstart our science by 1,000 years. Don't need your tech, and we don't want your admission. We want to know why the Krell were running." Valen paused. "Running, they were conquering, they are expansionists." Vance shook her head, stepping closer, invading the Archon's personal space in a way no subordinate would dare. "No, we interrogated the survivors. We cracked their nav computers. They weren't expanding. They were fleeing. They threw themselves at our guns because they were more afraid of what was behind them than they were of us. They were desperate." "So, Mr. Archon, what is out there in Sector 88 Zeta? What scares the Krell so much that they preferred to die on Earth rather than face it?" The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The curiosity of the Ethelgard officers turned to dread. Valen felt a chill ripple through his crystalline form. He had suspected, but to hear it confirmed by a primitive admiral was jarring. "TH. There are rumors," Valen said carefully. "Old legends, the voidborn, entities of entropy that exist in the spaces between stars, but they are myths. The Krell are superstitious." Vance pulled a data pad from her suit and tapped it. A holographic projection sprang up, a recording from a Krell deep space probe. It showed a star disappearing, not exploding, just vanishing, blinked out of existence. Then another. Then another. A darkness was moving, blotting out the light. "Myths don't eat stars," Vance said quietly. "The Krell saw this. They ran into us. We broke them, but now we see it too, and we aren't running." Valen stared at the image of the dying stars. The philosophical implications were staggering, a threat that consumed existence itself. You intend to fight that?" Valen asked, his voice trembling. "We intend," Vance said, "to survive. And if that thing is coming, we need to know what it is. We don't trust you. You watched us bleed. But we are pragmatic. You have archives, you have history, we have the guns and the will to use them. We are proposing a trade, information for protection." "Protection?" Valen asked, baffled. You offer us protection, we are the hegemony, we command 1,000,000 worlds. And yet, Vance pointed out, gesturing to the viewport where the shattered remains of the Krell fleet drifted, you couldn't stop the Krell, we did. You have the culture, the art, the philosophy. You have a beautiful garden, but you forgot how to build a fence. We are the fence. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. A species that had just crawled out of the mud, standing amidst the ashes of their own world, offering to protect an empire that had spanned the stars for eons. But as Valen looked into the Admiral's eyes, he saw the truth of it. The Ethelgard had forgotten fear. They had forgotten the visceral, bloody struggle for survival. They had become soft in their high castles. The humans were forged in fire. They were terrifying not because they were evil, but because they were capable of anything. They had weaponized their own suffering. If we agree, Valen said slowly, what do you require? Everything on the Voidborn, Vance replied. And resources to rebuild, not charity, payment. We will be your shield, Archon, but shields are heavy and they get battered. You will supply the iron, we will supply the blood. The treaty was signed not on parchment, but in the exchange of data streams. The hegemony provided the ancient star charts, the forbidden texts that spoke of the great devourers, the entities that woke every 100,000,000 years to harvest the galaxy's energy. In return, humanity began the construction of the Aegis Line. They did not build elegant ships. They built mobile fortresses. They took the asteroid belt of their home system and hollowed out the rocks, turning them into dreadnoughts. They mined the gas giants for fuel. They militarized their entire society. It was a transformation that horrified the hegemony observers. The humans worked without rest. They had no caste system, only a meritocracy of competence. If you could hold a wrench or a rifle, you had a place. They were a hive mind of individuality, a paradox of chaotic freedom and singular purpose. Valen remained in the Sol system as the liaison, watching the sleeping giant wake up fully. He walked the streets of their rebuilt cities, saw the memorials to the millions lost in the Krell War. He realized then the source of their power. It was grief. They were a species in mourning, and they were channeling that grief into a promise that it would never happen again. Months turned into years. The darkness in Sector 88 Zeta grew closer. Stars continued to vanish. The panic in the hegemony began to rise. Systems on the fringe began to riot. The council was paralyzed, debating evacuation protocols that would save only the elite. But in Sol, there was no panic. There was only the cold, hard rhythm of industry. The humans were building a gun the size of a moon. They were converting their own moon, Luna, into a kinetic accelerator of unprecedented scale. Valen stood on the surface of Luna, watching the massive magnetic rails being laid down, stretching for hundreds of miles. It is crude, he commented to Admiral Vance, who stood beside him, older now, her hair completely white. It is effective, she countered. Physics doesn't care about aesthetics. Force equals mass times acceleration. We are going to throw a rock at the darkness, Archon. A very fast, very heavy rock. And if the darkness is not material, if it is energy or psionic, then we will find a way to shoot that too, Vance said. We are adaptable, that is our gift. We don't specialize, we solve. The arrival of the Voidborn was not announced with a fanfare, but with a silence. The subspace communications network of the hegemony screamed and then died. The sensory buoys on the outer rim simply ceased to exist. The darkness arrived at the edge of the Sol system. It was not a fleet, it was a cloud. A sentient nebula of nanomachines and dark matter, stripping atoms from the void, consuming matter to fuel its expansion. It was the end of all things. The Ethelgard fleet, gathered behind the human line, began to charge their warp drives to flee. They had no weapons that could fight a cloud, but the human fleet did not move. They held the line at the heliopause, the Iron Rain formation. Tens of thousands of ships, from retrofitted Krell destroyers to the new Terran dreadnoughts, formed a wall. And behind them, Luna began to hum. The entire moon vibrated as the core reactors spiked to 300% output. This is the end, Valen whispered, watching the viewscreen on the light of reason. The cloud was consuming the Uit cloud, eating the comets, growing larger. It was a cosmic storm. They cannot fight a storm. Then the human communications frequency clicked open. It was a general broadcast to all allied ships. It was not a speech, it was a countdown. Targeting solution locked. Mass driver banks Alpha through Omega standby. All ships brace for gravitational recoil. Fire in 3, 2, 1. The surface of Luna exploded, not with destruction, but with launch. A projectile, a solid slug of tungsten and depleted uranium the size of a city, was accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. The recoil was so immense it shifted the moon's orbit slightly, a calculation the humans had accounted for. The slug streaked through the void, a lance of pure kinetic energy. It hit the center of the Voidborn cloud. The impact was silent in the vacuum, but the release of energy was visible across the sector. The slug struck the dense heart of the nanomachine swarm. The kinetic energy converted to heat instantly. A supernova of thermal bloom erupted within the darkness. The cloud boiled. The cohesion of the swarm was shattered by the relativistic shockwave. It was like shooting a bullet into a swarm of gnats. The center evaporated. The shockwave rippled outward, disrupting the magnetic fields that held the entity together. The Voidborn screamed, a psychic shriek that felled telepaths across the fleet, but it was a scream of pain. The humans didn't stop. Reload, fire battery 2. Another slug, and another. They were pounding the cosmic entity with the hammer of God. The swarm tried to reform, tried to lash out with tendrils of dark energy, but the human fleet moved in. They didn't engage in dogfights, they engaged in suppression. They fired flak walls of nuclear shrapnel, creating a barrier of fire that the nanites could not cross without burning. Valen watched in awe. The humans had turned warfare into an industrial process. They were dismantling a cosmic horror with the same methodical efficiency they used to mine ore. They were not afraid. They were angry. They were punishing the dark for daring to come to their home. For 3 days, the bombardment continued. Luna fired 12 times. The human fleet lost 4,000 ships holding the line against the tendrils. But on the 4th day, the cloud broke. The intelligence binding it shattered. The Voidborn dispersed, reduced to drifting dust, their cohesion lost. The stars they had consumed were gone, but the galaxy remained. The silence returned to the Sol system, but it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of a factory floor after the whistle blows. Valen shuttled down to Earth to the new capital in the ruins of Geneva. He found Admiral Vance in a wheelchair, her body failing from radiation sickness contracted during the war. She was looking out at a garden that was slowly regrowing. "We did it," Valen said softly. "You killed the death of the universe." Vance didn't smile. She just watched a bird land on a twisted piece of metal. "We bought time," she said. "There's always something else. The galaxy is a big, dark forest." "The Hegemony Council has voted," Valen announced. "We are disbanding the High Council. We are reforming into a federation. We want Earth to hold the seat of the High Command. You have proven that you are the only ones capable of making the hard choices. You are the terrifying creatures that scare the monsters away." Vance looked up at him, her eyes tired. "We don't want to lead you, Valen. We just want you to stop being so helpless. We can't be everywhere. We are tired." "Then teach us," Valen pleaded. "Teach us how to be terrifying. Teach us how to have that will." Vance nodded slowly. "It starts with realizing that you have something worth dying for. You aliens, you live for centuries. You fear death because you have so much to lose. We have short lives. We burn bright and fast. We don't fear the end because we know it's coming anyway. We just want to make sure that when we go, we leave a mark." She pointed to the sky. "We left a mark on the Voidborn. Now the galaxy knows. If you come to Sol, you better bring more than just a fleet. You be. Teeter, bring your own funeral shrouds." The revelation of the twist came a cycle later when Hegemony scientists, now working alongside human engineers, analyzed the debris of the Voidborn. Deep within the core of the ancient nanomachine swarm, they found a signal, a memory core. It was decoded by a human AI. The message was ancient, millions of years old. It was a warning, but it wasn't from a precursor race. It was from Earth. The genetic markers, the linguistic root structures, they matched prehistoric humanity. The scientists were baffled. How could a message from Earth exist inside an entity older than the human species? The answer lay in the time dilation of the Voidborn's travel and the cyclical nature of the universe. The Voidborn wasn't an alien invader. It was a terraforming tool gone wrong, created by a version of humanity from a previous cycle of the universe. A civilization that had reached the apex, created a tool to reboot the galaxy, and then failed to control it. The darkness was humanity's own ancient sin coming home to roost. Valen brought the data to Vance's successor, a stoic man named General Kine. "Do you understand what this means?" Valen asked, his voice hushed. "You are not just the defenders, you are the architects. This cycle, you are the antibodies fighting a virus you created eons ago. You are the terrifying creatures because you are the only ones who could kill it. It was yours." Kine looked at the data, at the undeniable proof that humanity was older and more dangerous than anyone suspected. He didn't panic. He didn't have an existential crisis. He just shrugged, a uniquely human gesture of accepting the absurd weight of reality. "Well," Kine said, tossing the data pad onto his desk, "I guess that explains why we're so good at breaking things. We built the shop." He looked out the window at the gleaming ships of the Terranethal Guard Alliance. "Doesn't change the mission, Archon. We clean up our messes, even the ones we made 1 billion years ago. If the galaxy wants to stay safe, they'd better stay behind us. Because now that we know we built the devil, we're the only ones who know how to exorcise him." The galaxy changed after that. The Ethelgard hegemony faded, replaced by the Terran Concordat. It was a peace maintained not by the threat of blockade, but by the knowledge that the humans were standing guard. They were viewed with a mix of awe and horror. They were the species that had warred with themselves, warred with the Krell, and warred with the end of time itself. They were calm, ethical, logic-driven monsters who walked into the fire so others wouldn't have to. And in the council chambers of 1,000 worlds, when the lights went dim and the nursery tales were told, the aliens didn't tell their children about the boogeyman. They told them about the humans. They told them that if they were good, the humans would ignore them. But if they were bad, if they woke the darkness, the humans would come. And that was the most terrifying, comforting thought in the universe. The reconstruction of the galaxy was slow, a process measured not in cycles but in generations. The humans, despite their victory, did not settle into the role of benevolent gods. They remained scarred, wary, and deeply pragmatic. They refused the intricate palaces the Ethelgard offered to build for them. Instead, they maintained their brutalist, functional aesthetic. Their ships remained blocky and gray, a visual reminder of the Iron Rain. Valen, now an elder statesman of his people and a permanent ambassador to Earth, found himself fascinated by the human concept of PTSD. It was not merely an individual affliction, it was a societal one. The entire species was hypervigilant. They scanned the dark constantly. They built redundancies for their redundancies. They treated peace not as a natural state, but as a temporary ceasefire with a hostile universe. One evening, Valen sat with Kine in a low-orbit station overlooking the rings of Saturn. The station was a military outpost, stark and smelling of recycled air and ozone. "You know," Valen mused, sipping a synthesized nutrient drink that the humans had tried and failed to make palatable for his biology. "The other species, the aquatic Zalarians, the silicon-based Thrax, they fear you. They whisper that you are too powerful, that you are a destabilizing element." Kine didn't look up from his monitors. He was reviewing logistics for the Outer Rim patrols. "Let them whisper," Kine grunted. "Fear keeps them honest. Before we showed up, the hegemony was rotting. You were so lost in your art and your debates that you didn't notice the wolves at the door. We killed the wolves. If the sheep are scared of the sheepdog, that's fine, as long as they stay in the pen and don't get eaten." "It is more than that," Valen pressed. "They worry that your origin, the connection to the Voidborn, they worry that the cycle will repeat, that you will become the destroyers again." Kine finally turned, his eyes hard. "We might," he admitted with a brutal honesty that made Valen flinch. "We have the capacity for it, we have the violence in our blood, but that's why we have rules, that's why we have laws, we bind ourselves. You aliens, you think ethics are something you achieve through enlightenment. We know ethics are chains we forge to keep the beast locked up. We are better than the ancient ones who made the Voidborn because we know what we are. We don't pretend to be saints. We just refuse to be demons." This philosophy, the Terran doctrine, became the cornerstone of the new galactic order. It was a philosophy of armed responsibility. The humans shared their technology, but slowly. They forced the other races to understand the cost of power before they handed over the keys. They made the Ethelgard dismantle their pleasure fleets and build hospital ships. They made the warrior races study agriculture. They forced the galaxy to grow up. It was a harsh tutelage, but it worked. The Pax Terrana was not a golden age of ease. It was an age of work, an age of preparation, because the humans insisted with absolute certainty that something else was coming. The Voidborn were just one symptom of a sick universe. Years later, a deep-range sensor array, one of the thousands the humans had seeded throughout the galaxy, pinged. It wasn't an invasion, it was a signal, a distress call. It originated from outside the galaxy, from the dark void between the spiral arms of the universe. It was faint, desperate, and unmistakably alien. The council convened immediately. The old fear began to rise among the Ethelgard and the others. "It's a trap," they cried. "It's another Voidborn. We should go silent. Hide." General Kine, now white-haired and leaning on a cane, stood before the assembly. The silence that fell was instant. "We don't hide," he said, his voice gravel. "We don't go silent. We are the answer to the distress call. That is who we are." He looked at Valen. "Prepare the expeditionary fleet, the 1st, 3rd, and 7th Terran armadas, and bring the Ethelgard medical cruisers." "We are going out there?" Valen asked, his heart racing. "Into the intergalactic void." "Someone is screaming in the dark," Kine said. "And we're the only ones with a flashlight. Besides," a grim smile touched his lips, "if there's something out there scary enough to make a civilization scream across the void, I want to meet it. And I want to kill it before it gets here." The fleet that launched was the greatest assembly of power in the history of the universe. Miles-long human dreadnoughts flanked by the elegant, crystalline support ships of the Ethelgard, the bioships of the Zalarians and the heavy cruisers of the reformed Krell. They moved as one. As they engaged their warp drives, tearing a hole in reality to leap into the dark, Valen looked at the human crew around him on the bridge of the flagship Terra Nova. They were calm. They were checking displays, adjusting power flows, talking about what they would eat for dinner. They were heading into the unknown, toward a potential horror that dwarfed the Krell, and they were treating it like a Tuesday. Valen finally understood the true nature of the HFY phenomenon, a term he had found in the ancient internet archives of Earth. It wasn't about physical strength. It wasn't about superior weapons. It was about the audacity to look at a hostile, indifferent, terrifying universe and say, "No, not today." It was the refusal to submit to entropy. The aliens were the products of their environments, evolved to fit a niche. Humans were the refusal to fit. They changed the environment to fit them. They were the terrifying variable that broke the equation of doom. As the stars stretched into lines of light, Valen felt a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. It was a dangerous, volatile thing, much like the humans themselves. But as he looked at the emblem of the Terran Concordat, a shield superimposed over a sword, he knew that whatever was waiting in the dark, it was about to have a very bad day. The monsters had arrived, and they were here to save everyone. The signal from the void grew stronger as the fleet traversed the intergalactic gulf. It was a journey that took months in warp, a time of isolation that tested the psyche of every non-human crew member. The emptiness outside the ship was absolute. No stars, just the oppressive weight of nothingness. The Ethelgard sailors began to suffer from void sickness, a crushing depression born of sensory deprivation. The humans, however, thrived. They organized tournaments, they watched ancient movies, they maintained a rigid schedule of drills. They were used to the dark. They had been born on a world that spun them into darkness every 12 hours. They carried their own light. When the fleet finally dropped out of warp, they found the source of the distress call. It was a Dyson sphere, or what was left of one. A structure the size of a solar system built around a dying red star. It was shattered. Great rents had been torn in its shell, bleeding atmosphere and energy into the vacuum, and swarming around it were the others, not the voidborn, something worse. Biological horrors, chitinous and massive, size of moons, feeding on the structure. They were like cosmic locusts. The scale was incomprehensible. A single one of the entities was larger than the entire human fleet. The bridge of the Terra Nova was silent. The tactical officers ran the numbers. Enemy mass exceeds fleet capacity by factor of 10,000, the AI reported. Probability of victory, 0.003%. Kine looked at the screen. He looked at the swarm devouring the Dyson sphere. He looked at the faint energy readings coming from inside the sphere, the survivors calling for help. "Never tell me the odds," Kine muttered, quoting an ancient pre-spaceflight scripture. He turned to Valen. "This is going to be messy. We can't fight them ship to ship. We're too small." "Then we retreat?" Valen asked, hoping for sanity. "No," Kine said. "We change the battlefield. They are feeding on the star's energy. We're going to poison the well." He ordered the fleet to deploy these Starkillers, experimental weapons designed to destabilize a stellar core. It was a weapon of last resort banned by the Galactic treaties, but Kine had brought them anyway. "We're going to induce a coronal mass ejection, a directed solar flare. We're going to burn them off the surface." "That will destroy the sphere," Valen cried. "The survivors." "The sphere is shielded," Kine replied coolly. "The outer shell is broken, but the inner habitats are intact. If the shield holds, they live. If we do nothing, they are eaten. We roll the dice." The order was given. The fleet maneuvered, dodging the massive tendrils of the bioships. They fired the probes into the red sun. The star shuddered. It turned from angry red to blinding white. A wave of plasma, a tsunami of fire, erupted from the surface, directed magnetically by the fleet's formation. It washed over the Dyson sphere. The cosmic locusts shrieked. A sound transmitted through the gravity waves. They burned. Their biological armor could withstand vacuum and cold, but not the direct touch of a star. They popped like blisters. The space around the sphere became a soup of superheated organic matter. The fleet rocked violently as the shockwave hit them. Shields failed, hulls buckled, but they held. When the fire cleared, the swarm was gone, reduced to ash. The Dyson sphere remained, its surface scorched, but its inner lights still twinkling. A channel opened from the sphere. The face that appeared on the screen was unrecognizable, a geometric entity of light and sound. It spoke in mathematics, the universal language. The translation appeared: gratitude, confusion, you are small, how did you wield the star? Kine stepped forward, adjusting his uniform. "We are humanity," he said, "and we are very stubborn. We received your call. We are here to assist." The entity paused. "We are the architects," it replied. "We built the paths between galaxies. We thought we were alone. We thought the hunger," it gestured to the remains of the locusts, "was the end. You are unexpected." "We get that a lot," Kine said. The alliance that followed changed the definition of existence. The architects possessed knowledge of physics that made warp drive look like a steam engine. Humanity possessed the tactical insanity required to defend the architects while they rebuilt. It was a symbiotic relationship. The universe got smaller and safer. Decades later, Valen lay on his deathbed. His crystalline form was dimming, the internal light fading. Kine had passed years ago, buried with full honors on the moon of Titan. A young human captain sat by Valen's side. "Did we do good?" Valen asked, his voice a whisper. "Did we make it safe?" The captain took his hand, a warm, soft, biological hand holding the cold, hard crystal. "We did, Archon. The border is secure. The architects are rebuilding the relay network. The galaxy is at peace." "Good," Valen breathed. "They were terrifying, your ancestors." "I know," the captain smiled. "We try to live up to it." "No," Valen said, his eyes closing. "You are not terrifying anymore. You are friends." And as the high Archon of the Ethelgard passed into the void, he did not fear the darkness. He knew that out there, standing in the shadows, was a human with a big gun watching over him. And for the first time in the history of the universe, the dark was not empty. It was guarded. The legacy of the Sol incident echoed through the eons. The species of the galaxy evolved, merged, and transcended, but the legend remained. In the great libraries of the transcendent AI clusters, there was a file marked the variable. It contained the history of Earth. It was a warning to any who would threaten the peace, and a promise to any who cried out for help. It simply stated, "Do not wake the sleepers of Sol unless you are prepared for the answer, for they are the kindness that kills and the monster that saves." The universe continued to expand, cooling as it drifted toward the final entropy. But on a small, blue world that had once been the center of a storm, a monument stood. It was simple, made of the same obsidian as the Ethelgard chamber and the steel of a Krell hull. It bore no names, only a single inscription in 1,000 languages, readable by any species that landed there. It read, "Here we hold the line. So you don't have TO." And in the silence of the wind sweeping over the grassy plains of a healed Earth, one could almost hear the echo of the answer. "Humanity, fuck yeah."